The perfect father, a caring husband, or was it all a lie? Her world crumbled when she found a note revealing a shocking truth. Betrayals, a mysterious accomplice, and dangerous schemes from the past now threaten not just her life but the future of her entire family. What lies behind the mask of the man she trusted most? Find out how one secret can destroy everything. His past ruined her future. A chilling tale of truth and betrayal. Maeve sat in her bedroom, carefully examining a box she had found in the attic of their home. The small wooden chest, locked with an antique key, seemed to hold an important secret. Her husband, Garrett, had always claimed it was just an old family heirloom, but today, she felt a pressing need to uncover what was inside. "Mom, you're in the attic again?" her daughter Tess asked from the doorway, arms crossed over her chest. "Just tidying up a little." Maeve tried to sound calm, though her heart pounded in her chest. "This is the 10th time this month. Are you looking for something?" Tess raised an eyebrow, her eyes far too perceptive for a 16-year-old. No, everything's fine." Maeve quickly hid the box in the closet. "Go to bed, sweetheart." But Tess didn't move. "By the way, did you know Dad has been calling some woman a lot lately?" she asked, tilting her head slightly, suspicion lacing her tone. Maeve froze, feeling the blood drain from her face. "What do you mean?" She tried to sound confident, but her voice betrayed her. "Nothing much. It's just, he's mentioned the name Lauren a few times while on the phone." "Who's that?" Maeve was silent. She knew the name wasn't random. Lauren had been her best friend from her youth, but they hadn't spoken in years. Their paths had diverged after an unpleasant incident Maeve had worked hard to forget. Why was Garrett bringing her up now? The next morning, waiting for Garrett to leave for work, Maeve opened his laptop. She knew the password. They had always trusted each other. At first glance, nothing seemed suspicious. Emails, work files. But then, her eyes caught an open social media tab. Lauren. Her profile. Garrett had been messaging her. There were many messages, and they were undeniably flirtatious. It seemed they were discussing more than just memories of the past. "How could you, Garrett?" she whispered, her heart aching. That evening, alone at home, Maeve retrieved the box from her closet. Her hands trembled as she found the key among the old items on the shelf. Inside the box was a letter. Old, yellowed, but still clearly legible. "Maeve, if you're reading this, know that what I told you isn't the whole truth. Tess deserves to know, but I was afraid to tell you. Lauren was also a part of our lives, and now this will come back to us. Forgive me, Garrett." Maeve clutched the letter in her hands, her breathing rapid and shallow. She had never thought Garrett capable of something like this, but now, a new question loomed. What exactly had he been hiding from her and their daughter? Then, she heard the sound of the front door opening. Garrett was home. There was a coldness in his eyes she had never noticed before. "We need to talk," he said quietly but firmly. Later that night, Maeve was startled awake by a loud crash from the kitchen. At first, she thought it might just be the wind, but her instincts told her otherwise. The house was eerily quiet, but the silence itself was unsettling. She got out of bed cautiously, trying not to wake Garrett, and made her way to the kitchen. Her bare feet softly pressed against the cold floor as her heart pounded louder with each step. She found the cabinet doors ajar, papers scattered everywhere, and among them, the very letter she had read earlier. But now, there was a photograph alongside it. The photo showed Lauren, young and smiling, holding a baby in her arms. Maeve stared at the child, her fingers trembling. It was a face she knew all too well. Tess. Suddenly, she heard the creak of a door behind her. Maeve spun around to see Garrett standing in the shadows. His eyes reflected fear, mixed with something resembling guilt. "What does this mean?" she asked, holding up the photograph. Garrett said nothing. His lips quivered, like someone who had run too far and could no longer escape the truth. "It's not what you think," he began, but his voice was too weak to sound convincing. "Then explain to me, Garrett, why your old acquaintance is holding our daughter in her arms." She stepped forward, her voice filled with pain and anger. "Maeve, I didn't want you to find out like this. I meant to explain everything, but I was scared." He raised his voice, trying to drown out her emotions, but he knew he was losing. You were scared? And what about me? What about Tess? She deserves to know her whole life is a lie. Garrett lowered his gaze. His silence spoke louder than any words. Maeve suddenly recalled moments that had once seemed insignificant. How Lauren had left their lives, how Garrett avoided talking about her, how he always dodged questions about Tess's early years. All those puzzle pieces finally formed a picture. Lauren. She couldn't raise Tess, Garrett finally said, summoning his strength. She asked me to. We were together back then, and I decided it would be better if Tess grew up in a normal family. I didn't want you to know because I was afraid of losing you. Losing me? Garrett, you lost everything the moment you decided to keep this from me. Maeve threw the photo down and stormed back to the bedroom. Her emotions swung between rage and despair. She realized she needed to talk to Lauren. The next day, Maeve went to the cafe Lauren used to frequent. She sat at a table by the window, her posture tense. When Lauren entered, her face showed a mix of mild surprise and unease. Maeve, what are you doing here? Lauren asked, sitting across from her. I want the truth, Maeve said, leaning closer. Why does Tess call me Mom when her real mother is sitting in front of me? Lauren initially wanted to deny something but sighed and looked out the window. Garrett didn't tell you everything. I was young, reckless. Tess came into my life at a time when I couldn't raise her. Garrett said he would take care of her. We agreed that I would leave your lives. But I've always kept an eye on her, Maeve. She's my daughter, and I never left her in my heart. And you decided now is the perfect time to come back? Maeve fumed with anger. How can you so easily destroy our lives? Lives? Lauren looked directly into Maeve's eyes. Have you ever thought about how I've felt all these years? She's my blood, and I can't stay silent anymore. Maeve didn't notice how time passed. She returned home, where Tess was waiting for her in the living room. In her hands was the same photograph, which she had apparently found in the trash. Mom, what is this? Why do I know nothing about this woman? Tess asked, her voice full of pain. Maeve wanted to say something, but the words caught in her throat. She realized she could no longer keep the truth hidden. We need to talk, Tess, she said, taking her daughter's hand. But was she ready for this conversation? Tess sat on the floor of her room, clutching the photograph in her hands. The picture showed Lauren, her smile familiar, her eyes almost identical to Tess's own. A storm of emotions raged in her mind. Anger, confusion, but most of all, intense curiosity. Who was this woman? Why had she been hidden from her? With thoughts that wouldn't let her rest, she went down to the living room. Her mother, Maeve, sat on the couch, holding her breath at the sound of Tess's footsteps. Her gaze fell on the photograph Tess held. You knew I'd find this, didn't you? Tess asked in almost a whisper, but her voice carried irritation. Tess, let's talk. I can explain. Maeve tried to remain calm, but her voice betrayed her, trembling. Explain what? That the woman in this photo is my real mother? That you and Dad lied to me my whole life? Maeve flinched, as if struck. She tried to find words that could fix everything, but they didn't exist. We wanted to protect you, Tess, she whispered. It was what was best for you. Protect me? From what? The truth? Are you telling me I've lived my whole life in a lie because of your decision? Tess's voice now carried both anger and pain. At that moment, Garrett entered the room. He immediately realized the conversation he had feared so much had taken place. What's going on? He asked, though his eyes already sought answers in Maeve's expression. She knows, Maeve said almost soundlessly. You knew and stayed silent. Tess turned sharply toward him. How could you? Tess, listen to me. We did what we thought was right. We just wanted you to grow up in a loving family. Garrett stepped toward her, but Tess backed away. Don't you dare talk to me about love when all your love is built on lies. That evening, Tess didn't go to bed. She studied every line of the letters and photographs she had found, trying to understand who Lauren was. Her eyes filled with tears each time she imagined how things might have been if the truth had come out earlier. In the morning, she didn't say goodbye to her parents and simply left the house. She knew where to find Lauren. The address was in one of the letters. Her heart pounded as she pressed the doorbell on the old wooden door. Lauren opened the door almost immediately. Her eyes showed surprise that quickly turned to worry. Tess? Lauren said her name as if afraid it was just a dream. Are you Lauren? Tess's voice was firm, but her hands trembled. Yes, it's me. Are you my mother? Lauren froze, but only for a moment. She slowly nodded, her eyes filling with tears. Yes, Tess, I am your mother. Tess didn't know how to respond. Her emotions were mixed, but she knew one thing. She wanted to know more. I want to know why you left me. Why did I grow up with people who lied to me? Lauren sighed, inviting her into the house. It's a complicated story, but I'll tell you everything if you're ready to listen. Meanwhile, back at home, Maeve and Garrett were arguing. How could you let this happen? Maeve was nearly shouting, her hands trembling. You should have told her the truth when she was little. And what would that have changed? Garrett shot her a sharp look. She would have known her mother left her. Would that have made her happier? And what about our lies? She hates us now. And that's on you, Garrett. Me? What about you, Maeve? You agreed to all of this because it was convenient for you. Don't act like the victim. Their argument was loud, but both knew their words were futile. Tess had already made her choice. When Tess returned from Lauren's, her heart was filled with new questions. Lauren had told her everything. About her youth, the decision she had to make, the agreement with Garrett. Her words seemed sincere, but Tess felt it wasn't enough. She decided to stay with Lauren, at least for a while, to get to know her better. When Tess came home, she walked into the living room, where Maeve and Garrett were waiting for her. I'm going to stay with Lauren, she said without hesitation. What? No, Tess, you can't do this. Maeve stood up, her eyes brimming with tears. It's my decision, Mom. I need to get to know her. But we're your family. Garrett tried to sound calm, but his voice betrayed his fear. Family? You've lied to me my whole life. I don't know what that means to me anymore, Tess said, avoiding their eyes. She went upstairs to pack her things. Maeve stood motionless, her hands trembling. Garrett said nothing. They both knew they couldn't stop her. Maeve couldn't calm down. From the moment Tess left for Lauren's, her thoughts had been a tangled knot she couldn't unravel. Her heart ached, but along with it came fear. Fear of losing her daughter for good. Every fiber of her being screamed that she needed to act. The next morning, carefully closing the door behind her, Maeve got into her car and drove to Lauren's house. She had found the address while helping Tess sort through her things. Her hands shook on the steering wheel, and her heart pounded with adrenaline. Lauren opened the door, her face calm, but her eyes glowed with caution. She seemed to have been expecting Maeve, though she hadn't thought the meeting would happen so soon. I knew you'd come, Lauren said, holding the door. Tess is upstairs. Do you want to talk to her? No, I'm not here because of her, Maeve said, trying to keep her composure. We need to talk. Just the two of us. Lauren disappeared for a moment, then returned holding a cup of coffee. Come in, she said, stepping aside so Maeve could enter. The room looked neat, almost sterile. Nothing indicated that someone with a tumultuous past lived here. Maeve felt out of place in this space, but she didn't intend to stay long. You can say what you want and I'll listen, Lauren said, sitting on the couch. I want to understand what you're after, Maeve said sharply, crossing her arms over her chest. You've been absent her entire life, and now you suddenly want to take her away? Take her away? Lauren smiled, but it was a bitter smile. No, Maeve. I don't want to take her away, but I want her to know the truth. She has the right to it. Maeve felt as if she had been slapped in the face. Her anger, which she had been trying to suppress, began to boil over. The truth? You're talking about truth, Lauren? You left her as soon as she was born and walked away without looking back. How dare you talk about rights? Lauren leaned forward, her voice turning cold. You know nothing, Maeve. You have no idea what I went through to make that choice. A choice? That was a choice? Maeve shouted, feeling her anger spiraling out of control. You left her, and now you want to paint yourself as the victim? You don't know what Garrett told me, Lauren said quietly, but her words were sharp as a blade. You only know his version. Maeve froze, her breathing quickening. She had always believed Garrett had been honest with her, but now, Lauren's words made her doubt. What do you mean? She asked, staring at Lauren. I left Tess because he told me you wanted her more than I did. He said you couldn't have children and that this was your only chance. Lauren sighed, her eyes filling with tears. He said it was for her own good, and I was foolish enough to believe him. Lauren's words exploded in Maeve's mind. She had never doubted Garrett, his love, or his honesty. But now, she couldn't ignore what she had just heard. You're saying he manipulated you? She asked, trying to hold back panic. Yes, and he did it in a way that made him look like the hero. I was young and scared, and he knew exactly how to use that against me. Maeve didn't respond. Her thoughts were too chaotic. She knew she needed the truth, but now she feared that truth would destroy her life. I don't want to hurt you, Maeve. I didn't come back to take Tess away, but she has the right to know who her real parents are. Maeve stood up, unsure of what to say. Her world suddenly felt foreign. Lauren stood up with her, walking her to the door. You don't have to believe me, Lauren said as Maeve walked out, but you need to talk to Garrett. Ask him about those times. Maybe then you'll understand. When Maeve returned home, Garrett was already waiting for her. His expression was tense, like that of a man who knew he had something to hide. Where were you? He asked, his voice too sharp. At Lauren's, Maeve said, not taking her eyes off him. Garrett paled. He tried to maintain his composure, but his hands clenched into nervous fists. And what did she tell you? She said you lied to me, that you manipulated her to take Tess. Is that true? Garrett remained silent. His eyes were fixed on the floor, and he couldn't meet her gaze. Answer me, Garrett. Is it true? He raised his head, his face filled with pain. Maeve, I did it for us. I knew you wanted a child, and I couldn't let you go without one. For us? You ruined her life and Lauren's life. And for what? Garrett had no answer. Maeve felt their marriage hanging by a thread. The house was wrapped in silence. Maeve sat in the kitchen, absent-mindedly stirring her coffee, when Garrett entered the room. He looked exhausted, and his eyes shone with worry. We need to talk, he said, sitting across from her. Talk? Maeve set the spoon down and crossed her arms over her chest. What can you possibly say that I don't already know? I know everything has gone too far. His voice was almost pleading, but I want to fix it. For you. For Tess. For us. Maeve let out a bitter laugh. You should have thought of that before you started lying. Garrett buried his face in his hands, sighed, and said, Give me a chance to explain. I did what I thought was right, but now I'm ready to make it right. Garrett knew he needed to rebuild Tess's trust. So, he decided to visit Lauren to talk to her. His heart tightened at the thought of facing her again after all these years. Lauren opened the door and froze upon seeing Garrett. Her face turned stone cold, but she let him inside. What do you want, Garrett? She asked coldly, crossing her arms. I'm here for Tess, he said, avoiding her gaze. We both want her to be happy. You want her to be happy? Lauren laughed, but her laughter was bitter. After everything you've done? You lied to her all her life, and now you want to play the hero? I admit my mistakes, Garrett tried to sound confident. But you're no saint either, Lauren. Do you even remember how it was? Lauren stepped forward, her voice sharp. You told me I wasn't fit to be her mother. You used my fears to take her away. I did it for her own good. Garrett snapped. You didn't have stability back then. I could give her everything. You used me, Garrett, Lauren said, pausing to take a deep breath. But there's something else you haven't told her. At that moment, Tess entered the room. She looked confused, but immediately noticed the tension between the adults. What's going on here? She asked, looking between her father and Lauren. Tess, there's another truth you need to know, Lauren said, walking toward her. Lauren, don't you dare. Garrett stepped between them, his voice filled with fear. What? What else are you hiding? Tess now looked at both of them, her voice full of anger. Tess, Lauren began, her voice trembling. Your father. He had a relationship with me not only before you were born, but even after we decided you would stay with them. Tess felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Her eyes filled with tears. Is this true? She asked, looking at Garrett. It was a long time ago, Garrett said, his voice barely audible. It doesn't matter now. Doesn't matter? Tess stepped back. You lied to Mom, lied to me, and you're still trying to say it doesn't matter? Tess ran out of the house, tears streaming down her face. She didn't know where to go but knew she didn't want to be near either of them. Maeve was waiting at home, but when she saw Tess enter the house with tear-streaked eyes, she knew something had happened. Tess, what's wrong? She asked, hugging her daughter. Mom, I can't trust either of them anymore, Tess replied, wiping her tears. My whole life is a lie. Maeve felt her heart clench. She realized she now had to be strong for Tess, even if it meant breaking ties with Garrett for good. Tess sat at a bus stop, clutching a backpack with a few things she had managed to grab. Her heart pounded in her chest, and her hands trembled. She glanced around, as if afraid Maeve or Garrett would find her and stop her. But at the same time, she knew this escape was her only chance to find herself. Are you sure this is the right decision? She quietly asked herself, wiping away a tear. A bus pulled up to the stop. The driver opened the doors, and Tess stepped in without hesitation. She was heading into the unknown, but leaving behind all the pain and lies, she felt a sense of relief. Tess arrived in a small town where no one knew her. She found a cheap motel and rented a room for a few days, using part of her savings. Her first day in the new place began with planning. She needed to find a job to support herself and a place to live. On the third day, Tess got a job at a local cafe. It was simple work, serving coffee and cleaning tables. But for her, it was something more, a chance to start fresh. You're new here, huh? A coworker asked, a young man with a bright smile. I'm Nick. Yeah, Tess replied, trying not to reveal too much. Just decided to change my surroundings. Well, welcome to our little chaos, Nick said jokingly, winking at her. Tess smiled. It was the first light in her life after the dark days she had left behind. But her peace didn't last long. One day, as she was returning home after her shift, Tess noticed a car parked near her motel. It was Garrett. Her heart froze as she saw him step out and look around. She quickly hid around the corner and called Lauren, not knowing who else to turn to. Lauren, he's here, Tess said, her voice trembling. Garrett? Lauren asked. How did he find you? I don't know. Tess could barely hold back tears. But I don't want to see him. Tess, listen, Lauren said. I don't know what he wants, but you need to be careful. If necessary, I'll come to you. Tess felt her world begin to crumble again. She decided to stay in her room until Garrett left. The next morning, Garrett was waiting for her outside the cafe. Tess knew she couldn't avoid him any longer. What are you doing here? She asked sharply, trying to appear confident. Tess, we need to talk, he said. I know you're angry with me, but I can't just let you walk away. Walk away, she laughed bitterly. You don't have the right to decide what I can and cannot do. I'm your father, Tess. I was trying to protect you. Protect me? Tess shrugged. Protect me from what? From the truth that you've been lying to me my whole life? Garrett remained silent, unsure of what to say. His face looked worn and tired. Tess, I know I made mistakes, but I want to fix them. Give me a chance. A chance? Tess looked at him with tears in her eyes. I didn't need your chance, Garrett. I needed you to be honest from the beginning. She turned and walked into the cafe, leaving him standing on the street. That evening, Lauren arrived in town. She called Tess and offered to meet. They sat in a small park, speaking quietly so as not to attract attention. I don't know what to do, Tess admitted. I thought running away would solve everything. But now I feel worse. Tess, you're strong, Lauren said, placing a hand on her shoulder. You can get through this, but you need to find your place in this world. I just want to be happy, Tess whispered. Lauren smiled. You'll find your happiness, Tess. But to do that, you need to decide what you want. Later that night, Tess heard a strange noise in her motel. She stepped into the hallway and saw a shadow moving near her door. Her heart raced, and she thought of Garrett. Who's there? She asked, trying to sound confident. No one answered, but the sound didn't stop. She cautiously approached the door and opened it. What she saw made her freeze. The night was quiet, but Tess couldn't sleep. The events of the past few days replayed in her mind over and over. She stared at her phone, debating whether to call Lauren, but eventually tossed it onto the bed. Something about Garrett's behavior didn't feel right. Why had he found her here? In the morning, she finally called Lauren, who answered almost immediately. "Lauren," Tess began, her voice sounding confused. "How did he find me? I didn't tell him where I was." Lauren was silent for a moment, then quietly said, "Tess, we need to meet. I found something out." Tess and Lauren met at the cafe where Tess had started working. Lauren looked tense, holding her phone in her hands. "What did you find out?" Tess got straight to the point, her arms crossed over her chest. Lauren carefully placed her phone on the table and looked Tess straight in the eye. "I checked my phone. Garrett installed a tracking app. He's known where I was this whole time, and I'm sure it's the same with your phone." "What?" Tess felt her heart skip a beat. He's been tracking us?" "Yes," Lauren nodded, her voice firm. "It's the only explanation. He's using technology to control us, Tess." "How did you find out?" Tess asked, her hands nervously gripping the edge of the table. "A friend helped me. He's a cybersecurity specialist." Lauren sighed. "I didn't know Garrett would go this far." Tess leaned back in her chair, feeling a wave of anger wash over her. All those moments when Garrett had accidentally appeared wherever she was now seemed like part of a bigger scheme. "This explains everything," she whispered. "He always knew where I was, even when I didn't tell him." "It's not just control, Tess." Lauren leaned closer. "It's manipulation. And it's not the first time he's done this." "What do you mean?" Tess asked cautiously. Lauren sighed slightly, as if weighing whether to speak. "Before you and I first met, Garrett used the same tactics on me. He tracked me, controlled where I went, and who I talked to. That's one of the reasons I left you. He convinced me that I was worthless and couldn't be a good mother." Tess felt her heart tighten. She had always thought of Garrett as her protector, but now it seemed like that was just an illusion. After their conversation, Tess couldn't sit idly by. She decided to return to the motel, but this time she intended to face Garrett head-on. Her hands trembled as she opened the door to her room. And, as she suspected, Garrett was waiting for her inside. "How did you get in here?" she demanded sharply, trying to suppress her anger. "Tess, calm down," Garrett said, standing up from the bed. "I just want to talk." "You were tracking me," she snapped, not giving him a chance to justify himself. "You tracked me and Lauren. You were controlling us." Garrett tried to appear calm, but his voice betrayed his tension. "I did it for you. I wanted to keep you safe." "Safe?" Tess smiled sarcastically. "Safety doesn't mean surveillance, Garrett. You crossed the line." "Tess, you don't understand," he said, stepping closer. "Lauren is a manipulator. She wants to destroy our family." "No, Garrett," Tess said firmly. "You're the one destroying everything. You've ruined our lives with your lies." Garrett fell silent, his face turning stony. He realized he was losing control. Tess packed her things, ignoring Garrett's attempts to stop her. She knew she needed to leave this place, but now her goal was different. She wanted to find true freedom. Before leaving, she turned to Garrett. "I'm not your little girl anymore," she said, "and I won't let you control my life any longer." She closed the door and walked away, feeling a strength within her that she had never felt before. Tess sat on a bench outside the motel, hugging her knees and staring into the darkness. She felt her world falling apart piece by piece. Everything she believed in had turned out to be a lie. Her father, whom she had always seen as her hero, suddenly became the enemy. But this night promised no peace. Her phone rang. It was Lauren. "I just found something, Tess. We need to meet." Lauren's voice was tense. "What now?" Tess asked in a whisper, feeling she couldn't take another blow. "It's important. You need to know who Garrett really is." An hour later, they were sitting in Lauren's room. On the table before them was a box of documents, yellowed with age. Lauren pulled one out and placed it in front of Tess. "This is your father's real name," Lauren said, pointing to an old copy of a birth certificate. "What?" Tess leaned closer, staring at the document. "That's not his name." "Exactly," Lauren nodded. "Garrett Reynolds isn't who he claims to be. His real name is Michael Gray." Tess felt as if she'd been punched in the chest. She didn't know what to say. What does this mean? Why did he change his name? Lauren carefully placed another document in front of her. An old newspaper clipping. The headline screamed, "Real estate fraud suspect disappears after scandal." "This is his past," Lauren whispered. "Before he met me, he was involved in real estate fraud schemes." "This isn't true." Tess shook her head, tears glistening on her cheeks. "He would never do something like this." "Tess, I know it's hard to accept," Lauren said, touching her hand. "But it's true. He created a new identity to avoid punishment." Tess stood up, nervously pacing the room. "You're talking about the man who raised me, the man who loved me. How could he live with all of this? How could he hide it?" "He's a master manipulator," Lauren sighed. "He's always known how to make people believe whatever he wanted." "Why are you telling me this now?" Tess asked, her voice filled with pain. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" "Because I was scared too," Lauren looked away. "He threatened me when I tried to come back for you. He said he would destroy me if I got close to you." Tess froze. Her imagination painted Garrett as someone entirely different from the man she thought she knew. But it explained everything. His control, his constant need to keep everything in check. Tess decided she couldn't avoid this any longer. She called Garrett. "We need to talk," she said coldly. "Tess, I'm glad you called." His voice was gentle. "Where are you?" "I'll come to you." "No," she replied. "I'll come to you myself." When Tess entered his temporary apartment, Garrett looked nervous, but tried not to show it. She placed the documents in front of him. "What is this, Garrett?" she asked, looking him straight in the eye. Garrett paled. His hands clenched into fists. "Tess, that's the past. It doesn't matter." "Doesn't matter?" Tess raised her voice. "You built your entire life on lies. You made me believe in something that never existed." "I did it for you," he said. "I wanted you to have a stable life." "Stable?" Tess laughed bitterly. "This is stability? Constant control, lies, and manipulation?" Garrett tried to justify himself, but his words carried no weight. Tess saw in him a man who had destroyed everything she knew. She walked out of his apartment, feeling her heart break. But this time, she knew she wouldn't let him influence her life anymore. She decided to go to the police with all the evidence she had found. She was no longer afraid. The evening was dark and oppressive. Garrett stood in his room, staring at the suitcase he had just packed. He knew his time was up. The evidence Lauren had could destroy everything he had built over the years. He had no intention of staying and facing the consequences. "I did this for us, Tess," he whispered, as if she could hear him. But even in those words, there was no conviction anymore. Placing the suitcase in the trunk of his car, Garrett glanced at the empty street. His heart raced, but he forced himself to leave everything behind. The next morning, Tess woke up with a strange feeling in her chest. Her phone was silent, and that felt suspicious. Garrett usually at least tried to reach out. She called his number, but it was disconnected. "Something's wrong," she said to Lauren, who was sitting across from her with a cup of coffee. "What do you mean?" Lauren looked up. "He's gone. He always tries to say something, to justify himself. But now, nothing." Lauren frowned, her face growing serious. "Maybe he's realized we won't fall for his manipulations anymore," she suggested. "No," Tess shook her head. "He never gives up without a fight." Tess grabbed her phone and started scrolling through her messages, but found nothing new. Her intuition told her Garrett was up to something. If he's decided to run. Tess met Lauren's gaze, her eyes shining with determination. "We have to find him." Tess remembered Garrett's old friend, who worked at a local bank. His name was Tom, and he often helped Garrett with personal matters. Tess and Lauren headed to the bank, where Tess managed to convince Tom to have a brief conversation. "Look, Tess, you know I can't disclose client information," Tom said, nervously adjusting his tie. "Tom," Tess's voice was cold but firm, "this isn't about a client. This is my father. And if you know something, you need to tell me." Tom sighed and glanced around cautiously to make sure no one could hear them. "He withdrew a large sum of money a few days ago," he whispered. "That's all I know." This information was enough to confirm Tess's suspicions. Their next stop was Garrett's house. Tess and Lauren entered using the key Tess always carried with her. Inside, they found chaos. Empty shelves, missing documents. Garrett hadn't left any obvious clues. He prepared carefully, Lauren said, surveying the room. But he couldn't destroy everything, Tess replied, starting to search through the drawers. Her hands trembled with adrenaline. After a few minutes, she found a note hidden in a book. It contained only a few words. "Do it for the family." "What does this mean?" Tess asked, showing the note to Lauren. "It could be his way of justifying himself," Lauren suggested. "But it might also be a clue." Lauren suddenly remembered an old cottage Garrett had once been fascinated with. It had been their favorite spot for short getaways back when they were together. "That might be it," Lauren said. "He always loved that place when he wanted to escape reality." Tess didn't wait. They got into the car and drove to the cottage. The journey was long and tense, but they didn't give up. When they arrived, the cottage appeared empty. But Lauren noticed something unusual. A car was parked behind the trees. It was Garrett's vehicle. "He's here," Tess whispered, clenching her fists. They entered the cottage and found Garrett sitting in a chair, as if he had been waiting for them. "Tess, Lauren," he said, trying to sound calm. "You shouldn't have come here." "And what? Watch you disappear again." Tess stepped closer, her voice trembling with anger. "Is this your solution? Just running away?" "Tess, you don't understand," he said. "I'm doing this to protect you." "Protect me?" she nearly shouted. "You can't even protect the truth." Lauren stepped closer as well. "Garrett, this is the end. You can't control us anymore. We know everything." Garrett sighed, and desperation flashed in his eyes. "You don't understand. If the truth comes out, it will destroy not only me but also you." "We're ready for that," Tess said firmly. "But you can't run away anymore." Tess sat in the motel, wrapped in a blanket, staring at her phone. Her fingers nervously twisted a small silver pendant Garrett had given her on her 16th birthday. Her whole life felt like a lie, too overwhelming to process. The father she had always seen as a pillar of support turned out to be a man who not only hid secrets but also entire dark chapters of his past. Suddenly, her gaze fell on the note found in Garrett's old office. The name, Richard Kane, now haunted her. "Who are you, Richard?" she whispered. Her phone rang. It was Lauren. "I found something," Lauren said without greeting, "and I think you'll want to hear it." Half an hour later, they were sitting in a cafe on the outskirts of town. Lauren laid out several old documents in front of Tess. "These are records of Garrett's financial transactions," Lauren explained. "And this name," she pointed at a signature, "Richard Kane. Is he his partner?" Tess asked, leaning closer. "More than a partner," Lauren replied. "They worked together long before you were born. Their dealings go far beyond the law. I found out Richard wasn't just an accomplice, but also the one who helped Garrett avoid accountability." Tess shuddered. She felt like every word Lauren spoke opened a chasm she wasn't ready to face. "If we find Richard, we'll find Garrett," she said firmly. The next few days, Tess and Lauren spent searching for any clues about Richard Kane. They checked old addresses, called Garrett's acquaintances, but it felt like searching for a needle in a haystack. Their search led them to a small town where Richard had last been seen. They entered a local bar, hoping to gather some information. "You're looking for Richard?" the bartender asked, eyeing them suspiciously. "Yes," Lauren said, leaning toward him. "Do you know where he is?" The bartender paused for a moment before replying. "He shows up here once a month, but he's hard to pin down. Do you know what this is about?" Lauren carefully answered, "We have some unfinished business with him." The bartender nodded and added, "He's got an old warehouse nearby. But be careful. That guy doesn't mess around." They arrived at the warehouse late at night. Tess felt her heart pounding as they approached the large metal doors. "Are we sure he's here?" she asked, gripping her flashlight tightly. "No, but we don't have another option," Lauren replied. The doors were locked, but Lauren found a window they could climb through. Inside, the warehouse was dark and filled with a strange smell of dust and metal. "What is this?" Tess whispered, spotting a large table covered in documents. They began sifting through the papers until they found what they were looking for. Documents confirming that Garrett and Richard had worked together on numerous fraudulent schemes. "This is what we need," Lauren said, holding up one of the papers. "We can take this to the police." Suddenly, they heard the sound of a door opening. Someone had entered the warehouse. "Who's there?" a loud voice called out. It was Richard. He saw them and stopped, pulling out a gun. You shouldn't have come here, he said, approaching them. Richard, Lauren began, raising her hands. We don't want anything but the truth. The truth, he laughed. You have no idea what you're messing with. While Lauren tried to reason with Richard, Tess cautiously moved toward the table, holding her phone. She dialed 911 but didn't have the chance to press call before Richard noticed her. Put that down, he said sharply, pointing the gun at Tess. Tess froze, her hands trembling. She hasn't done anything, Lauren said, stepping forward. This is between us. No, this is between all of us, Richard replied with a smile. Did you really think you could beat us? We've always been one step ahead. At that moment, Tess realized that Garrett and Richard had been working together far more closely than she could have imagined. They were like a single machine, destroying everything in their path. Lauren and Tess managed to escape the warehouse, but they left all the documents behind. Richard and Garrett disappeared without a trace. The police were unable to locate them, leaving the case open and unresolved. Tess sat in the car next to Lauren. Her face was calm, but her eyes were full of pain. We lost, she whispered. Lauren shook her head. We did everything we could, but sometimes evil just wins. They stared at the night sky, each wondering, could they ever find peace after everything that had happened? Can you forgive those who betrayed everything you believed in?